Next generation standalone VR is here. The Oculus Quest 2 is not only much better than its predecessor, it's also a lot cheaper. Stick with us for our full review on Facebook's latest headset. So here it is. Meet the Oculus Quest 2, the worst kept secret in VR at the moment. Now, if you've been following the VR industry at all recently, you'll know that this thing is a pretty big deal. The original Quest really gave VR a sort of second wind as a device that didn't need a PC, cost $400, and also didn't need any external tracking gear. We don't know exactly how well it's sold, but it was sold out for a lot of its life cycle, and developers started to make some real money on the device. So with a proven track record, Facebook is really kind of doubling down with the Quest 2. Considering all the improvements this thing makes, it's kind of crazy you can pick one up for $300. This feels like it could be a real moment for VR. So there's a lot of ground to cover here, but Quest 2 is actually very similar to its predecessor in terms of features. It's still a standalone device that doesn't need a PC, and it's going to play all the same games and apps with no exclusives for the foreseeable future. You get a very similar sort of quality for things like head tracking, controller tracking, and hand tracking, which is to say that you get really excellent inside-out tracking for these two things, and still kind of experimental but promising tracking for these. But we did see the original Quest get a lot of updates to those areas over the course of its life, and Facebook says that it's going to continue improving these aspects, especially the hand tracking. There are a few small areas of tracking improvement to talk about, but we'll get to those in a bit. Primarily though, Quest 2 is concerned with three main areas of improvement: comfort, performance, and visual fidelity. So in terms of the fit, Quest 2 is about 50 grams lighter than the original Quest, coming in at something like 503 grams. It also replaces that tough rubber strap at the back of the original Oculus Quest with this kind of more stretchy thing that you saw in the Oculus Go a couple of years ago. Now, before we go on, when we're talking about the fit of a VR headset, we have to remember that everyone's head is different. My head, for example, if you'll take a quick look, is big and weirdly elongated. So keep that in mind when I talk about my views of how this thing fit my face. Ugh. I can immediately notice that, yeah, it's lighter on my face, which is a really big relief compared to the original front-heavy device. But this is front-heavy too. It's burning in, it's weighing on the front of my face right now. It will take a bit longer for my face to really feel the fatigue of it, but I would say after about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm really starting to feel the burn, and of course I'll have that lovely VR face. Again, it's definitely an improvement, but with this type of design, you're just not going to get the kind of comfort you get with, say, the PSVR or the Oculus Rift S with those brilliant little halo strap things. Helpfully, there are these two little toggles at the back of the strap that you pull and push to adjust the tightness. But when you combine those with the traditional Velcro strap, it can be quite finicky to find the perfect fit, especially if you're trading this around with a lot of other people. Now, there's a big caveat to all of this, and that's that this is not the end of the Quest comfort story. Unlike the first Quest, these things are pretty easy to snap off. Like that. But what are you going to put here? The Oculus Quest Elite Strap. Now, I'm not really going to go into too much detail about this thing because it's a different accessory, it's part of a different review that we'll also have on the site today. But suffice to say that I think a lot of people will consider this a pretty essential add-on. For now, we are strictly reviewing what comes in the box, so we don't need this. And then there's one more thing to talk about in terms of the redesign, and that is the audio. A lot of people weren't massively happy with the original Quest speakers, which weren't placed directly in front of the ears. They were actually kind of about here-ish, which created kind of a tinny sound. Well, the redesign on the Quest 2 means these things actually come much closer to your ear now, and it does result in a deeper, richer sound. I'll still say that if you weren't that thrilled with it the first time around, this probably won't make the biggest difference to you. But of course, there's an audio jack right here, so you can use your own earphones, and of course there's Bluetooth connectivity. But this time around, Quest 2 actually only has one audio jack as opposed to two like on the last one. So that's comfort, which is kind of improved, but this thing really starts to pick up in the next area, the display. Now that's kind of a hard thing to talk about because I can't actually really show you, but Quest 2 has 50% more pixels than the original device. It delivers a resolution of 1832 by 1920 per eye. You're really going to have to put it on for yourself to see the difference, but once you do, I promise you will find it quite striking. A higher resolution display really helps tackle the screen door effect, which is a technique that refers to being able to see the lines in between pixels on a VR display. The higher the resolution, the less you'll see those gaps. With Quest 2, we hit a spot where those lines are almost negligible. They're definitely still there, and they're quite apparent when looking at something like a blank wall with simple texture or text that has rough edges. But a lot of the time, VR is going to appear clearer to you than it ever has before. It's even slightly higher resolution than the Valve Index, which is kind of crazy. But the upcoming HP Reverb G2 should have it beat. Take note that Quest 2 does switch out Quest 1's OLED display for LCD though, so you won't get quite as deep shadows and darker environments, though it's not a huge difference. Now, another big improvement to the display is the refresh rate. Having a higher refresh rate means that an image is shown to you more times per second, resulting in a smoother overall experience. The original Quest had a 72Hz refresh rate, but Quest 2 has a 90Hz refresh rate. A lot of people would consider 90Hz to be kind of the baseline minimum for VR refresh rates, so it's an important standard to hit. But at launch, the only elements of Quest 2 that will support 90Hz are the home screen and the Oculus browser, so it's kind of difficult to talk about how well it's been implemented right now. That said, those small tracking improvements I mentioned at the start, that's kind of what I meant. 90Hz means that something like hand tracking suddenly appears to be just a bit smoother. So while the quality of the tracking itself really wasn't actually that much better, I was perceiving it to be faster and more responsive. Now there's one more thing to talk about with the display, and that is one of the key things that every VR headset has to consider. I'm going to try this with a straight face, so don't laugh. It's called IPD, which stands for interpupillary distance. Most headsets feature a way to adjust the IPD to suit a different range of distances between people's eyes. Without it, VR can feel pretty uncomfortable if it's not accommodating to your eye distance. Now on the Quest 1, that meant that there was an IPD adjust slider right at the bottom, which not there. Instead, Facebook has a new system which is a bit more hands-on. Take a look at the raised eye cups here. To change the IPD, all I need to do is either push or pull. The lenses will slot into 3 presets that Facebook says cover between 68mm and 58mm. Personally, I'm right in the middle of that range, so for me, this is not a big issue. However, for anyone that falls out of that average, I would really suggest waiting to try Quest 2 before buying one, because as great as this thing can be, it's not much good to you if it gives you a giant headache all the time. The other thing to talk about in terms of a redesign is these new controllers right here. Now, if you know your Oculus history, you'll know that these look kind of like a hybrid between the first touch controllers and the second generation that released alongside the first Quest. From the first touch, there's the circular design, which provides a lot more space for your thumb. So when you're not using it to press buttons or move the analog stick, you can rest it here. Also, as you can see, it's quite a lot bigger than the Generation 2 touches. And while I'm happy they're bigger, they really are quite a lot bigger. Now don't get me wrong, it's not too much of a problem, but I don't feel like my finger properly curls around this big controller now, it's so big. It's perfectly comfortable, it works perfectly fine, it just doesn't feel quite as natural as it did before. However, after about 10 hours of use, this thing has never slipped off accidentally, and it's actually pretty secure anyway. Also, after 10 hours of use, this remains at 100% charge, which is kind of crazy. It's also much better than the headset's main battery, which is still at around 2.5 hours from full to flat when playing big VR games. So the final core pillar to talk about here is performance, which again is a little hard to show you, but will make a big difference in the long run. Inside the Quest 2 is Qualcomm's XR2, the latest hardware from the company. In fact, they use it in their own VR reference designs. When it released back in May last year, the original Quest used a Snapdragon 835, which wasn't even top of the range for the time. There's a pretty significant jump in terms of horsepower here then, but remember that some of that is going towards the extra resolution and eventually some of the extra frame rate too. My time with the Quest so far has largely been spent playing old games that don't really feel like they've been optimized for the new hardware yet, but Facebook has sent over a few demos for new experiences. So I got to try stuff like a very early, non-final build of The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. And you can definitely see some differences. It's a short demo, but there's foliage on the sides of buildings that can't be seen in the Quest 1 version, and even environmental obstacles like wooden pallets can be seen in the Quest 2 edition. We'll have a full graphics comparison later this week that goes into more detail. Right now, one of the biggest differences I've noticed in terms of performance is with the fixed foveated rendering, or FFR. This refers to a technique developers use that blurs the screen around the edges of a VR headset to give you more processing power for what's shown in the center of the device. A lot of developers used it pretty heavily in the last headset. Take something like the lightsaber dojo in Vader Immortal. Today on Quest 1, you can see some pretty obvious FFR in the corners of the screen, which might make a lightsaber handle blurry, for example. However, the effect in Quest 2 is dramatically reduced. It's still there in some games and apps, including the headset's home environment, but generally speaking, it's harder to spot. Like I said at the start though, Quest 1 and 2 will have content parity for the foreseeable future, and I can't help but think we'll see what Quest 2 can really do once we start seeing some exclusive software for the system. So let's take a minute to bring it back to the pricing. For $300, you get the 64GB of the Oculus Quest 2. That's a price that puts it on par with a Nintendo Switch or the upcoming Xbox One Series S. And I have to say that through the existing library of content and the promise of upcoming releases, it's a genuine choice over those two. But Facebook is also selling a 256GB version for $400. Take that and then spend $130 on the Elite strap, a battery pack, and a carrying case, and you come to $530, which is still $70 cheaper than the upcoming HP Reverb G2. And even then, you still need a PC to power pretty much any other VR headset. The value you're getting with the Quest 2 is something we simply haven't really seen yet in VR. If you've ever wondered over the past 5 or 6 years when this technology would get to the right price point, well, it kind of feels like we're there now. Of course, it's so well priced you have to ask yourself what Facebook's actually getting out of it, and the answer of course is you using Facebook. See, Quest 2 is the first Oculus branded headset that requires a Facebook account. The company is doing away with its old Oculus account system in October. If you want to use this, there's no way around it. You have to use your Facebook account. Now, for a lot of you watching this review, that's probably not a problem. But there are legitimate concerns around Facebook, its data privacy policies, and what it does with the information it collects on you. Using a piece of technology that tells Facebook where you're looking and how you react to certain situations is a little disconcerting. But ultimately, where you fall on that topic is entirely up to you. If anything, it underscores just how desperately we need competition in this market at this level. At this price and this spec, I have to be honest, there's nothing that really competes with the Quest 2, and that's actually a bit of a problem. We need competition, Facebook needs competition, the industry needs competition. I don't think any of us really want to be seeing one company running a monopoly on the VR market a year from now. But once you put all of that aside and look at this thing on paper, it's really hard to deny that the Oculus Quest 2 is a phenomenal VR headset. It's meaningfully better than its predecessor pretty much right across the board, and it costs $100 less. To be frank, I really struggle to see VR getting dramatically better in terms of performance and value at this price for some time. The updates to screen resolution and performance definitely make it a worthwhile upgrade to the original Quest, and if you still haven't bought a headset for yourself, you're not going to find a better jumping on point than this. And so it is through slightly gritted teeth that I proclaim the Oculus Quest 2 as the new king of VR.